Hello, my dears, you're on the Omline channel. Let's talk about self-destruction today. This is what we love to do. We have the unconscious, which Mr. Freud came up with. Everyone talks about it. In reality, this is our astral body, and what is its favorite habit? To suffer. Because when we suffer, when things are hard for us, when we're in pain, that's actually a pleasure because these are intense emotions. They're rich and energetically, they're just so satisfying. That's when we're happy. What's happiness like? Well, just a little bit, a brief moment of joy. It's not that satisfying because in reality, the emotions of happiness have a high vibration and they don't give us that kind of, let's say, pleasure. It turns out that we love to suffer because our astral body, our subconscious, is, so to speak, an addict. And it loves to get pleasure, and the pleasure has to be intense. For example, many of us love to get involved in some kind of toxic relationship with all the ups and downs, where you're either dumped or loved one minute and hated the next, where your heart gets crushed and then sent to hell. What is the very essence of pleasure in these relationships? Because there's a constant thrill, a rush. You wake up in the morning and think, today they love me, tomorrow they don't. So besides the fact that we love falling in love with all kinds of jerks and pathological men and women, we love getting caught up in all kinds of relationships. We also have this favorite thing where we love to activate the self-destruction mechanism. Again, it's our wonderful astral body. It's unconscious. To put it in psychological terms, it happily draws to itself some favorite mechanism around which to suffer and agonize. That is, it picks out one thing we love the most, and each of us has one favorite button. And it turns out that each of us has our own favorite button of suffering. And around this button of suffering, a block of emotions and matter forms in the astral body, in the unconscious, resulting in patterns of behavior. And we actually strive for and constantly attract certain events into our lives that will continuously sustain a specific kind of suffering. Let's figure out what these favorite mechanisms of self-destruction are and how they manifest in us. Most often, the outward manifestation of a person caught in a self-destructive cycle is when that person, well, as everyone around them probably perceives it, or as they themselves feel, sees their life spiraling out of control. It gets harder and harder, and the person starts slipping into harmful habits. Alcoholism, drugs, some kind of gambling addiction, or a pathological attachment like spending all their time on the computer, limiting social interaction, arguing with loved ones. We all experience different manifestations of this external self-destructive mechanism. When a person loses normal external social functioning, fixates on some internal pain, and tries to avoid it, a certain mechanism of this already external self-destruction kicks in. One that is already noticeable. But my dear friends, it's not necessary to slide into alcoholism, become a gambling addict, or chase after prostitutes. We may have a very hidden self-destructive mechanism, and a person who appears perfectly well adjusted on the surface may in fact possess this self-destructive mechanism and be slowly destroying themselves. For example, this could be a respectable member of society who goes to work and has responsibilities, but who drives himself into workaholism to compensate for some feeling of regret, guilt, or resentment. At the same time, we'll agree, I think, what a decent person he is, what a good member of society. He goes to work, cares about people, suffers. And this is also called self-destruction, because his personality is so small. He has now completely channeled all his energy into this. He's set this goal for himself, and nothing else interests him. He comes home from work, lies down on the couch, and falls asleep. That is this kind of workaholism. This is actually highly praised in society. It is considered very good, a success, a career. In reality, it is a mechanism of self-destruction. As a result, the person stops producing certain basic happiness hormones against the backdrop of a fixed dominant emotion, such as anxiety, a sense of responsibility, or fear for the job. He literally stops producing any basic happiness hormones. So he gets up, goes to work, does his job, fulfills his duty, thinks, I'm good, I'm doing well, but there's no happiness. We say, like, this isn't self-destruction, but it really is self-destruction. And then they become a candidate for a heart attack, a stroke, liver disease, gout, and so on. That is a whole bunch of illnesses. And we say, what a good person. This is also self-destruction. Something inside the person, some guilt, resentment, or self-pity, has triggered a suppression mechanism, and the person truly retreats into this socially acceptable form of behavior. Or, for example, here's another variant of this decent self-destruction. You don't necessarily have to become an alcoholic, a drug addict, or a nymphomaniac. For example, here is a respectable wife who devotedly gives herself entirely to her family. She raises her children, she worries, she is devoted to her husband, and in this way she finds her fulfillment, her purpose. Everyone needs her very much. And it seems, oh, what a wonderful woman. She has everything planned out, she has everything thought through, her life, her children, just a business plan for the next 20 years. She controls everything. But in reality, what is this ideal lady running from within herself? It means there's something. Perhaps this is also an escape. The repression mechanism has kicked in, and the person truly begins to live in such a beautiful outward life, which actually leads to self-destruction. Over time, this beautiful woman develops severe chronic depression, meaning she has a lack of serotonin and dopamine, premature aging, and hormonal imbalances. And in the end, as often happens, she thinks, I gave my life to you. My life was wasted. It's as if there's no sense of inner satisfaction. So in addition to some generally recognized mechanisms of self-destruction, there is a very effective mechanism of self-destruction. We are very good at killing ourselves in a highly skilled way. For example, there is another way of self-destruction, the spiritual one. That is, this happens too. When a person begins to actively engage in spiritual practices, they have certain unresolved issues, accumulated pain, resentments, and heavy matter in the astral body. They become fanatically religious or fanatically devoted, begin to observe an endless number of ascetic practices in a crazy way. Do not eat or drink, descend into fanaticism, and become demonstratively detached from reality. His body adapts to this ascetic lifestyle. Deep down, he feels that he has now practically achieved some kind of ideal of behavior. He develops a sense of pride. I'm so special, I'm awesome, I'm doing the right thing. But then again, this is precisely a mechanism of a certain kind of self-destruction, in which the old, wounded, resentful, unsatisfied, unhappy personality within the person remains, and they simply try to compensate for it through super-spirituality, through asceticism, and through demonstrative pride in their new self. And let's further assume that after all, certain events do occur, most often, and indeed, certain events do happen, that show a person that they are the same as before, that they are still hurting, still as abundant as before, still loving people, still not loving people, still weak, still vulnerable, and they think, oh, that's it, I'm bad. And this mechanism of self-punishment is excluded. That is, this is not a happy spiritual guru, but some kind of unhappy person, self-punishing or wallowing in self-doubt, eternally doubting themselves, searching within themselves for a whole bunch of flaws and pointing them out. This is a mechanism of self-cursing, and this mechanism of self-cursing is precisely such a mechanism of self-destruction. That is, outwardly we may see before us a happy, that is, spiritually developed person with an absolute absence of happiness. Right? That is when there is a conflict inside us. So guys, it turns out that self-destruction is the presence of an internal conflict. Let's put it this way, internal conflict. And this conflict immediately arises from the presence of some kind of underlying issue within a person in Nadezhda. Note, there are three main types of material around which this mechanism of self-destruction begins to spin. Let's take the classics: resentment, regret, and guilt. So let's break this down using the example of resentment. We've all been hurt at some point in all sorts of ways, especially from childhood or past lives. Most importantly, we carry these resentments with us. Resentment toward people, resentment toward God, resentment toward loved ones, and, for example, resentment sets this survival mechanism in motion. You can't seem to forgive the very people who once burned you at the stake, but it turns out you'll still try your hardest to please them because suddenly they burned you. So they won't burn you at the stake, but it turns out you'll still try your hardest to please them because suddenly they burned you. So they won't burn you at the stake again. Or the boys or girls at school hurt you. Yes, they caused you some harm, and you understand the mechanism. You haven't forgiven them. Yes, you have resentment inside, and you live with this resentment your whole life and try to compensate for it. So, our mechanism of self-destruction begins with the fact that around some matter, around some heavy, painful experience, heavy matter on the astral plane, the matter begins to condense. Then it feeds on itself. And what does it feed on? The attraction of various events, circumstances, and people, so that you feel this suppressed resentment more and more and compensate for it even more and more. Following feelings of resentment, regret, and guilt, we naturally experience stress, anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, self-condemnation, and internal conflicts. So it turns out there is one thing around which everything starts to revolve. And here, in principle, psychologists say that within the framework of a single life, if you recall some kind of initial mechanism or trigger, the thing around which everything somehow began to spiral, for example, it might be some completely trivial thing from childhood. And so you end up living your life revolving around this little thing, and it turns out that a whole series of events and a whole web of interconnected things stem from the fact that you can't come to terms with some grievance, some regret, or some sense of guilt. But my opinion is that this is our favorite suffering, our favorite subject. It comes to us primarily from past lives. That is, we've already learned in past lives exactly what to take offense at. Okay, let's imagine then how the mechanism of resentment works. You have this matter of resentment, and its task is to become denser within you. Because you yourself derive pleasure from this feeling of resentment, it makes you feel alive, helps you make plans, strive for something, all to ensure you don't feel wronged, to be good, to avoid situations where you might be wronged. And that is why we make money, build careers, do all sorts of wonderful things, have children, and build houses. We earn millions of dollars just to somehow get rid of this pain. That is, in reality, such a heavy material pattern in the astral body around which everything is built can, on the one hand, lead to self-destruction. But on the other hand, thanks to it, you first reach some kind of social peak. For example, getting an education, starting a family, showing society that you're okay, and then at a certain point, everything starts anyway. This thing gets triggered, and sooner or later you start to spiral down, or you manage to die in time at the peak, because this mechanism is designed to feed itself. It's impossible to sustain it constantly. Sooner or later it will inevitably start drawing more energy than you're capable of compensating for, and then a difficult situation begins. So we have this mechanism of resentment, and we have different variations. For example, you're being hurt or have been hurt. Let's say you have some event buried in the past that you don't remember. It forces us to first suppress some feeling of distress. If we don't have time to process it, talk to someone about it, get some support, or compensate for that resentment. How is resentment actually compensated for? Resentment is compensated for with aggression. That is, if you've been wronged, you have to go up and fight back. But we are civilized people, or we are small, or we can't fight back, or we're tied to a post being burned. There's no way to fight back against this crowd of people. In other words, you can't respond to them in any way. And so this unresolved resentment builds up inside you. And this resentment, the energy of resentment, demands some form of external release, but you can't provide it. Where does this energy go? So this energy can build up, and manifest itself in some mundane behaviors. For example, it might manifest as aggression towards someone who has absolutely nothing to do with it. That is, some anger out of the blue, pride, provocative behavior, or when it's allowed, yelling at your loved ones. That is not where it actually happened. There are people who are simply angry by nature because they harbor some kind of immense resentment inside that they aren't aware of. The only things that can help you with this are either serious psychotherapy or an online consultation. Because if you find the cause, maybe he isn't really that angry. Maybe he's angry because in a past life he was burned, and he still can't take revenge on everyone. But he's still resentful that love was denied to him back then. And so our resentment as a possibility can either be suppressed or manifest in some kind of active behavior. Because, you see, this mechanism of being easily offended is initially determined by our own physiology and structure, just like you and me. We have the amygdala, which is responsible for fear and aggression. So when we perceive someone in our field of vision, we have a mechanism to either fight or flee. Or if we want to be loved, so we won't be eaten and will be left as a wife. This mechanism of adaptation to fight or flee. And when you've been hit and you've run away, you can either praise yourself for having run away, or you can start engaging in self-flagellation. More often than not, we do just that, engage in self-flagellation. So this mechanism of self-flagellation in response to an offense is still the most common mechanism. You walk away and then, in hindsight, think about it. Have an internal dialogue with the person. Try to explain to them how you were wrong. That is, you end up, for example, wanting to talk to the person with whom you have some unresolved issues. So you have this accumulated pain, this resentment, and it doesn't turn into self-destruction because at least you're thinking it through like this, and these thoughts come to the surface. I'd say this to you now, I'd say that to you now. And that's really good. If you can find a friend, sit them down in the kitchen, pour some tea or something stronger. Just get it all off your chest. You've beaten everyone, you've stood your ground, you've asserted yourself. You have this aggressive energy generated by our animal instincts. Most of the time we don't have that mechanism. We can't allow ourselves to use it. Why? Because we simply can't realize that we need it. So we go through life and we constantly experience some kind of hurt. We don't notice it or pretend not to notice it. It builds up, builds up, builds up, and then eventually, yes, that's it. Either aggression or internal repression. Now we slip into anxiety disorders, into depression, and then serious therapy is required. So if we look at this feeling of self-destruction, let's see where it comes from. Feelings of resentment, regret, or guilt. It's unconscious. The problem is that it's unconscious. The person isn't aware of it. They weren't taught that they have a right to these feelings, for example. That is, in some families, children are raised in a way where you don't even have the right to whine, complain, or say anything. It's seen as a sign of weakness, especially with men. This happens very often. Or resentment is not accepted in our society, is not accepted at all to understand your own feelings or to realize what's going on inside you. It's just a matter that might require some kind of reflection. Another interesting thing is that we're living right now in this wonderful transitional period. We don't know where it came from or where it's going, a period of constant stress. We, too, experience a powerful sense of these repressed grievances. Regrets that some of our plans haven't come true and never will, and a sense of guilt toward ourselves and our loved ones that the plans we're counting on aren't coming true either. And these are also aspects that are and will continue to be this very mechanism of self-destruction. We live, we go through life, and we don't even have time to realize that something is truly troubling us. So over time, this mechanism kicks in, and the matter becomes dense. From the perspective of our energy psychology, a person begins to attract more and more events to themselves. The matter becomes denser and denser. And we need to find a way out of it, and then the way out is found in the form of some kind of compensation. That's how we end up with stress, anxiety, depression, aggressive behavior. We develop all sorts of addictions, escapism, cross-dressing, cosplay, I don't know, whatever people do, in order to find and create for themselves some kind of parallel reality, a parallel different state in which over time things start to feel better. That is why such self-destruction is a mechanism of compensation. As we now understand, self-destruction is a kind of compensation for some internal pain. We have another very effective mechanism for compensating for such pain, shifting the responsibility onto someone else. So the mechanism of self-destruction is falling in love immediately. And let's look again at why. We really do very often just love to fall in love with these kinds of relationships or pretend that there's a relationship. To get carried away, to completely forget ourselves, to kind of immerse ourselves. Oh, I love her. Oh, I love him. But there is no such love. It's just a game of love that is becoming attached to someone. Why? Because it gives you the chance to blame someone, to make someone responsible for your life, to share responsibility for your life with someone, to get confirmation from someone that you're needed, meaningful, loved, and so on. Why? Because you don't actually love that person. Very often we end up in relationships with people we don't even love. But we become attached to them because these people give us the opportunity to compensate for this inner regret, resentment, and guilt. And we think, how can that be? I loved her so much. In reality, you didn't love her. It was some kind of guilt, resentment, or regret that was being compensated by having a person by your side. Someone who fit the image you'd created of them, who sometimes supported you or said something to you, or was simply there with you. And because that person was there, that feeling of your pain was dulled. And what happens is that as soon as that person, who was like a band-aid for us, disappears from our lives, whether we broke up or they betrayed us, or worse, it's a complete tragedy, or they died, God forbid. Well, anything can happen in this life, or they changed. And we develop such a strong codependency, this desire to get that person back. And the person who was left behind, the one who was abandoned, can start acting out, entering a cycle of self-destruction. That's when this demonstrative self-destruction really begins. I feel bad. Come back. Give me all your attention. Why? Because the source here is that I can't take responsibility for myself. That is, I need someone for whom I can take responsibility, someone who will take responsibility for me, help me move forward and support me, someone through whom I can feel whole and shift that responsibility. And when that mechanism disappears, all those self-destructive mechanisms that were perfectly compensated for come to the surface. And that's why it seems to me a huge number of people stay in marriages just to avoid the pain. Even if the marriage is unhappy, even if you're being beaten in the marriage, or cheated on, or dissatisfied with the financial situation or living conditions, you don't walk away from 1,000 things, because when you do, you'll be face to face with your own inner demons. And people prefer to just live, to endure, however they justify it. The kids, the household, the house, the dog, the job. Where would I go? Our parents said that marriage is for life, right? How could it be otherwise? You can't just change husbands several times, that's indecent. It turns out that, it's precisely through relationships that we most often compensate for our pain, resentment, regret, or guilt. And when we're needed, when we're useful, when we're socially integrated. How many things do you do simply because we're subjectively and socially embedded in a context? Well, someone calls us at midnight, right? What kicks in for you then? Guilt, responsibility, resentment, and social context. You'll get up and go save someone. Do you love that person? No. I mean, just imagine how much of our social lives is tied to a mechanism that can lead to self-destruction at any moment. At any moment. Here, if you don't get the right feedback, everything in you kicks in. I'm miserable, everything's bad, I'm dying, life is pain. There's another very interesting mechanism of self-destruction. Why children get sick so often in a family. Let's go back to that. Here's the mechanism of self-destruction. A woman, having found a husband and fallen in love with him, built a life out of what was there, and loved him. Then there are these internal mechanisms of repressed emotions, repressed pain, resentment, guilt, and regret. She is needed, she is important, she fits into the context, she serves a purpose. In order to be needed, the children start getting sick. Because you simply can't be happy just like that. Because you have to suffer, you have to endure, you have to suppress feelings of guilt, regret, and resentment within yourself. It's absolutely necessary for some kind of trouble to happen. Children must get sick, they must have some kind of problem. She must constantly run around with a fire extinguisher, putting everything out, saving everyone. And then right here, the whole life passes in some kind of external bustle. In psychology, there is a term called the identified patient, where very often there is one person in the family, most often a child. As a rule, it's the youngest child. They make him sick. Or he's born healthy, but then for some reason he gets sick. And the family revolves around him. It can't fall apart. And people, in fact, where does it all start? With the internal compensation of these adults, or resentment, or regret, or guilt. These are the fundamental issues at play here. So guys, we have a whole range of these self-destructive mechanisms that sometimes don't affect us at all, but they have a profound impact on our loved ones. When, say, couples undergo family therapy, you really come to understand that the child is sick because it's beneficial for them to be sick. That's what keeps them together. And if the child suddenly recovers, they'll simply have nothing to do. Yeah, what for? Doctor, I'll live. But what's the point? That's it. Meaning they'll have to part ways. And everything is built around that. Their self-esteem, their self-understanding, their sense of self-worth. Everything is built on it. So the person, like a builder, has constructed a whole lot of things around that great pain. It works out for him if he now gives up all of this and says, who am I now? But I'm not who, because inside everything is built as compensation for resentment, regret, and guilt. That's why we often say, oh, look at that person who's fallen apart, while we're like, we're holding on, we're doing great, everything's fine with us, my darlings. If something goes wrong and karma or fate brings some kind of difficult situation, this whole house of cards inside this built-up psyche can simply collapse. Gambling addiction, sexual perversion will begin. Gambling addiction, sexual perversion will begin. Harm to one's health, suicide attempts, seeking attention. Most often, suicide attempts are an attempt to get attention. Save me, I can't handle myself. Or simply harming one's own body, drug addictions. There, yes, dopamine has taken hold. We feel good, joyful, and it doesn't hurt as much anymore. That's it. If we approach this issue seriously, really deal with those dense matters that we have, and we have an unlimited number of different possibilities. There are psychological possibilities, there are energetic ones, there are possibilities within our approach. The most important thing is to find the essence, to boldly seek out this essence. And if you're a psychologist, don't just scratch the surface, don't build a house of cards. Focus on the essence itself, look for your deep-seated guilt, look for your resentment, look for your regret. That is, if you find this, rather than beating around the bush like, why don't they love me? Why didn't he call me? And why isn't business going well? And why can't I catch a crocodile? And why is the coconut growing? And why do I feel bad? Why am I in a bad mood? Don't look at the surface, but immediately look into the depths. Our method allows you to very quickly dig into those depths, find them, and neutralize them. And then you can start building not a house of cards, but a solid palace made of glass and concrete. Welcome to the Omline Academy. We're a blend of psychology, psychotherapy, psychic abilities, yoga, and the development of superconscious abilities. You'll rebuild yourself, learn to understand, and create a new life for yourself. I hope this video was helpful. Let's stop the self-destruct mechanism at its very earliest, most basic stage. Now we've understood together where our self-destruction begins. It was great to hear from and see all of you. Please subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and see you on the Omline channel. Bye.